When I was 16, I got a summer job cleaning rental units at a low-income housing complex. I got the gig through the property manager, a woman I used to babysit for. The pay was surprisingly good for high school work, and the job was simple. Whenever a tenant moved out, we'd go in, clear out anything left behind, and clean the place top to bottom for the next family. A lot of units had been abandoned in a hurry, belongings left behind, furniture still in place. Some apartments looked like people had just stood up mid-meal and walked out forever. One afternoon, I was paired with a college student I'll call Chris. He was maybe 20 or 21, easygoing, naturally took the lead. I was fine with that. We were assigned a unit at the end of a row. The layout matters, so I'll describe it quickly. You entered through the front door into a small living room. On the right side were two staircases. One led up to the second floor. The other, behind a door, led down to the basement. The basement stairs turned twice, so you couldn't see into the basement from the main floor. The basement itself was one large, unfinished concrete room, washer and dryer against one wall, furnace in the corner, a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, no closets, no side rooms, no alcoves, nowhere to hide. That part becomes important. When we walked into the unit that day, it was obvious the previous tenants had left fast. The kitchen was filthy. Most of their stuff was still there, clothes, dishes, half-packed boxes. We spent the first couple hours bagging everything and sorting what could be donated. Then we started cleaning. Part of the kitchen job involved pulling the oven and fridge away from the walls to scrub behind them. We also had to remove the storage drawer underneath the oven to clean it properly. When it came time to put it back, we realized the rails were bent. The drawer wouldn't slide in, so Chris and I stood on opposite sides and kicked it hard, over and over until it wedged itself back underneath the oven. When we tried pulling it out again to test it, it wouldn't budge. We jammed it in too tight. We both laughed it off and figured the property manager could deal with it later. After that, we split up. Chris headed upstairs to clean the bedrooms. I stayed downstairs removing the glass light fixtures so I could wash them in the sink. I was standing on a ladder in the living room when I heard Chris call my name from upstairs. I called back. No response. I climbed down and went upstairs. When I found him, he was scrubbing a bathroom with earbuds in, completely focused. I asked what he wanted. He looked confused. I didn't call you. I shrugged it off, thought maybe I'd imagined it. One thing that always bothered me about that unit was the attic access. It was just a square hole in the ceiling above the staircase. The cover was missing, so every time I walked underneath it, I'd glance up into this pitch-black crawl space. I hated it. A few minutes later, I heard my name again. This time when I called back, Chris yelled down immediately, "Dude, I didn't say anything. You're hearing things." I agreed with him. It was weird, but I wasn't scared. Not yet. A little while later, I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing one of the light fixtures. I turned around to grab a fresh sponge. The oven drawer was sitting halfway out on the floor. I froze. Chris and I had kicked that thing into place. We'd pulled on it afterward to make sure it was stuck. It was completely jammed. I stared at it for a long moment, then walked over and kicked it back in. It took several hard kicks before it wedged under the oven again. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. Stuck solid. Satisfied, I went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, I turned around again. The drawer was out. I hadn't heard anything. Nobody else was downstairs. Chris was still up on the second floor. This time, I felt genuinely uneasy. I left the drawer where it was and went to check on Chris. He was still cleaning, headphones in, completely unaware. I went back downstairs and started reinstalling the light fixtures. Since it was a bright summer afternoon, I'd turned the lights off to work. I was standing on a small stepladder, trying to screw one of the fixtures back into place when the light suddenly switched on. The sudden brightness startled me. I jerked back, lost my balance, and fell off the ladder. The fixture slipped from my hands and came crashing down. It missed my head by inches and shattered on the floor. I sat there for a few seconds, breathing hard. I could see the light switch from where I'd fallen. Nobody was near it, and I could clearly hear Chris moving around upstairs. There was no way he could have run down, flipped the switch, and gotten back up in the time it took me to fall. The switch had turned on by itself. I still wasn't thinking about ghosts. I was just uncomfortable. I went upstairs and told Chris what happened. He looked uneasy. Then he admitted something. A few minutes earlier, he'd heard someone call his name too, and it didn't sound like me. We were both officially creeped out. The only task left was sweeping the basement. Neither of us wanted to go down there alone, so we went together. The basement was exactly as I described. One large open concrete room, nowhere to hide. We could see the entire space at a glance. Chris swept while I sat on the dryer and talked to him. A few minutes later, we finished and headed back upstairs. We were relieved to be almost done. We started gathering our supplies near the front door. I was standing maybe 2 feet from the open basement door when it happened. From below us came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Both of us froze. The footsteps were loud, clear, deliberate. Then they broke into a run. Something was charging up the basement stairs. Fast, loud, coming directly toward us. I looked at Chris, his face had gone white. The footsteps got closer. I grabbed the basement door and slammed it as hard as I could. Then we ran. We flew out the front door and across the lawn. At some point, Chris yelled something about the key. I screamed back to leave it. Neither of us stopped until we were on the other side of the complex. I barely remember what happened after that. Eventually, we went back to the property manager and told her someone had been inside the unit. We left our cleaning supplies behind and never went back. As far as I know, she called the police before anyone entered again. We never told her what actually happened. What could we say? That something invisible spent the afternoon calling our names, moving objects, turning on lights, and then charged up the basement stairs at us. It sounded insane. Even now, I'm not someone who jumps to paranormal explanations. I've had other strange experiences that could probably be explained away. This one is different. Maybe we imagined hearing our names. Maybe the drawer had a mechanical issue. Maybe the light switch malfunctioned, but that basement was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. We had just been down there. We swept the entire room. And those footsteps weren't distant or ambiguous. They sounded exactly like someone running up a staircase directly toward us. More than 20 years later, I still flinch when I hear footsteps on stairs. A few years ago, I ran into the property manager at a grocery store. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. I asked her if she remembered that unit, the one Chris and I had run out of. She got quiet for a moment. Then she told me something I didn't know. After we reported it, the police checked the unit. They found the basement door we'd slammed was damaged. The frame had splintered, like something had hit it from the other side with enough force to crack the wood. But the unit was empty. She also told me that over the next few months, 3 different cleaning crews refused to finish that unit. They all reported the same things: hearing voices, objects moving, lights turning on and off. Eventually, they stopped trying to rent it out. The last time I drove past that complex, the building was gone, torn down years ago. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that basement. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't slammed that door in time. This happened when I was 15.
I was always looking for ways to make extra money. I wasn't old enough for most real jobs, so I babysat for families around town. Usually it was neighbors or people my parents knew. Safe, predictable. One afternoon during summer break,
I was scrolling through Craigslist and found an ad from a woman looking for a babysitter. She worked overnight shifts and needed someone to stay at her house with her 6-year-old daughter. The girl's name was Lily.
According to the post,
Lily would already be asleep when I arrived and would stay asleep most of the night. The pay was really good, way more than I usually made.
I emailed her.
She responded within an hour and called me that same evening. She sounded completely normal, calm, professional. She answered all my questions and explained that she'd have to leave for work before I got there, so she'd hide a key for me outside. Since I was only 15, my mom wanted to talk to her first. They spoke for several minutes. I don't know what was said, but afterward my mom told me it sounded fine. The job was scheduled for the following night. I was supposed to arrive at 9:30 p.m. When the time came, my mom drove me to the address. The house was in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from where we lived, tucked at the end of a dead-end street. Tall trees surrounded it on all sides. Every light inside the house was on. My mom waited in the driveway while I walked to the front porch. I found the key exactly where the woman said it would be, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I turned and waved to my mom as she backed out of the driveway. Then I was alone. The house was completely silent. I assumed Lily was already asleep, just like her mom said. The inside looked normal at first. Family photos on the walls, a few toys near the couch, a small pink backpack leaning against a chair, kids' drawings stuck to the fridge with magnets. Everything seemed fine. I wanted to get a sense of the layout, so I walked through the first floor. The kitchen led into a hallway with several doors. As I stepped into the hallway, I glanced through an open doorway on my right. A man was standing inside the room. He was facing the window, staring out into the dark. I froze. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring at nothing. It was pitch black outside. There was nothing to look at. I stared for several seconds before finally speaking. The second I made a sound, he turned around. He smiled at me. That's the first thing I noticed. The smile, wide, unblinking. The second thing I noticed was the missing front tooth. I asked who he was. His smile didn't change. He didn't answer. I backed out of the doorway and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking. I called the woman. She answered after a few rings. I told her there was a man in one of the bedrooms. She sounded confused for a second, then said, "Oh, right. That's my brother." She said it like she just remembered. She explained that he had dementia and sometimes wandered around at night. She told me not to worry. He was harmless. Before I could respond, she told me to help myself to anything in the fridge and said I could sleep in the guest room at the end of the hall. Then she hung up. I stood there for a long moment trying to process what she just said. If her brother lived there, why wasn't that mentioned in the ad, or during our phone call, or when she spoke to my mom? I didn't like it, but I also didn't know what to do. I was 15, alone, and my mom was already gone. I decided to check the rest of the house. The hallway had 5 doors. The first one I tried was locked. I tried the second, locked. The third, locked. The fourth opened about 3 inches before stopping. I looked through the crack. Empty room, lights off. Nothing inside. I pushed it a little farther. Still nothing. I let it close and kept walking. When I passed the fridge again, something caught my eye. The drawing stuck to it looked old.
Really old. The paper had yellowed around the edges. One of them had dust sitting on top of the magnet holding it in place.
The pink backpack I'd seen earlier looked faded too, like it had been sitting there for years. I started to wonder when the last time a child had actually been in this house. I'd been there for almost half an hour, and I hadn't seen Lily. Hadn't heard her, hadn't seen her room, hadn't seen any recent toys, nothing. I reached the guest room at the end of the hallway. It was small, a bed, a nightstand, a lamp. I set my backpack on the floor. Then I noticed something. There was no lock on the door. I turned around to look back into the hallway. The man was standing at the opposite end, staring at me, smiling. I hadn't heard him move. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. For several seconds, we just looked at each other. Then I stepped inside the room and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed trying to calm down. I told myself it was fine. He had dementia. He was harmless. His sister said so. But something felt wrong. I called my mom. It rang 3 times before she answered. I told her everything. The unannounced brother, the locked doors, the fact that I hadn't seen any sign of the child I was supposed to be watching. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm coming to get you right now." Hearing that made me feel relieved and terrified at the same time. She hung up. I sat on the bed and waited. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. They got closer and closer until they stopped directly outside the door. I stared at the doorknob. It didn't move. I checked my phone. The woman still hadn't called back. I tried calling her 3 times, no answer. Then the door opened. Just a few inches, not wide enough to see who was on the other side. I sat completely still. The door stayed like that, cracked open. No one came in. No one said anything. I knew it was him. That's when I decided I was leaving. I got off the bed, moved to the window, and forced it open. I climbed out and dropped into the backyard. Then I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the street. I crossed to the other side and kept going. I made it nearly a block away before I slowed down. I pulled out my phone to call my mom again. Before I could dial, a text message appeared. From the woman's number, it said, "Where are you going?" I immediately looked back toward the house. I didn't see anyone. No one at the windows, no one outside. I hadn't seen any cameras when I was inside, but somehow she knew I'd left. I called my mom and told her not to come to the house. I told her to pick me up down the street. She pulled up 10 minutes later. I jumped in, locked the door, and we left. I never contacted the woman again. Neither did my mom. I never found out who the man really was. I never found out if Lily actually existed. I never found out what was behind those locked doors. But I think about it sometimes. And a few months ago, I was scrolling through a local news site and saw a story about a house in that same area that had been abandoned for years. Police found evidence that someone had been living there recently. Sleeping bags, food wrappers, cameras set up in multiple rooms. The article said they believed it had been used as a staging location for something, but they didn't say what. I looked up the address. It was the same street.
I don't know if it was the same house.
I never went back to check, but sometimes late at night, I still get texts from unknown numbers asking me the same question, "Where are you going?" And I never answer. When I was 17, I was always looking for ways to make money. My mom knew an older couple from her church group who needed help around their property for a couple weeks. Their names were Gerald and Diane, both in their late 60s, not frail, but getting there. They lived about 40 minutes outside town in one of those old farmhouses with a long gravel driveway, peeling white paint, and dense woods pressing in from all sides. The deal was simple. Stay there for just over a week, help Gerald with yard work, move furniture, paint the fence, clean out the garage, manual labor stuff. At the end, they'd pay me in cash. My mom trusted them because she'd known Gerald for years, and Diane seemed sweet the first time I met her. Quiet, but always smiling. She kept asking if I was hungry. The house felt exactly like you'd expect an elderly couple's home to feel. Floral wallpaper, creaky floors, the smell of old books and lavender soap. My room was upstairs at the end of the hallway. Small bed, single window, thin curtains. Gerald showed me around the property on my first day and rattled off a list of tasks. Diane made dinner. I noticed early on that she didn't talk much, but she always had this faint, neutral smile on her face. She asked my name 3 different times during dinner. Gerald just said she forgets things sometimes, normal old person stuff. I didn't think much of it. That night, I went upstairs around 11 and tried to sleep. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up to footsteps in the hallway. Someone was walking back and forth outside my door. The floorboards creaked with every step. I figured Gerald was up using the bathroom, but the footsteps didn't go anywhere, they just paced. Door to the end of the hall, turn around, back again. I lay there in the dark, listening. After maybe 10 minutes, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I stared at the gap beneath it, a wide, old-fashioned gap maybe 2 inches tall, and I swear I could see the outline of 2 feet. After a long silence, the footsteps moved away again. The next morning, I mentioned it to Gerald while we were working outside. He didn't look surprised. He said Diane sometimes wandered at night because she had bad dreams and got confused. He told me not to worry about it. I asked if I should lock my door at night. He kind of laughed and said the guest room didn't have a lock. Old house, old doors. I let it go. But the second night was worse. I woke up to the same pacing, except this time it was faster. I could hear Diane muttering to herself. I couldn't make out most of it, but I heard my name once. Her shadow passed under my door 3 or 4 times. Then the doorknob twisted. The door opened about an inch, just a crack. I heard whispering through the gap, but I couldn't make out the words. Then the door closed again. After that, I didn't sleep well. In the morning, I told Gerald exactly what happened. Once again, he explained it away. She probably thought the room was empty. She'd been doing things like that more lately. He said it was embarrassing for her and asked me not to bring it up. During the day, Diane seemed mostly normal. She made lunch, folded towels, watered plants. But every now and then, I'd catch her staring at me from across the room with this flat, suspicious look. Like she didn't recognize me. Like she didn't want me there. On the 4th day, Gerald and I were cleaning out a shed behind the house. I noticed a dented metal walker shoved behind some boxes. Next to it was a broken picture frame with dried brown stains on the glass. Later that day, when I went inside to use the bathroom, I noticed a long scratch on the hallway wall, chest height, like something had been dragged across it. There were also small dents in one of the doors downstairs, like someone had hit it, hard. That night, I pushed my suitcase in front of the bedroom door. It wasn't heavy, but I figured it would at least make noise if someone tried to come in. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the suitcase scraping across the floor. The door was halfway open. Diane was standing in the doorway in her nightgown. Her mouth hung open. She was breathing heavily through it, loud and rhythmic. I said her name, trying not to sound scared. She stepped into the room. That's when I saw the kitchen knife in her hand. She walked closer to the bed, whispering something over and over. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." She came all the way to the side of the bed and stood over me, the knife hanging at her side. I yelled for Gerald as loud as I could. Diane flinched like the sound startled her. Then she turned and walked out, stiff and mechanical, slamming the door behind her. Gerald came upstairs maybe 30 seconds later, acting annoyed, like I'd woken him up for nothing. I told him she'd been in my room with a knife. He kept saying she wouldn't hurt anyone, that she wasn't herself at night. I said I wanted to go home. He said it was 3 in the morning and my mom was probably asleep. We'd talk about it in the morning. I should have called my mom right then. But I didn't want to make it a bigger thing than it already was. I pushed the dresser in front of the door after he left and stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, Diane acted like nothing happened. She made pancakes, smiled, gave off normal grandmother vibes. Gerald pulled me aside and apologized, but it didn't feel real. He said Diane's memory had been getting worse. I asked if she'd ever attacked anyone before. He paused. Then he said she'd gotten upset with a caregiver once, but it was handled. That's when I realized he'd been hiding things from me. I told him again that I wanted to leave. He said he understood, but my mom was at work until late and he'd drive me home the next morning after we finished one last job. That afternoon, while Gerald was outside on the phone, I went looking for my backpack. I found it in the laundry room. There was a blood stain on the front pocket, clear as day. I called Gerald inside and showed him. He grabbed the backpack, looking angrier than I'd seen him yet, and said he'd accidentally cut himself earlier and moved my bag while cleaning up. He told me to stop worrying. I told him I was calling my mom. I went upstairs, packed my bag, and tried. The call failed twice. I texted her to come get me. No signal. Gerald refused to give me the Wi-Fi password. That's when I realized I was trapped. The final night, I didn't even get in bed. I sat fully dressed on top of the blankets with my shoes on and my bag next to me. Around midnight, Gerald came upstairs and told me to move the dresser. He said it was a fire hazard. I refused. For the first time, he yelled, "Move it now." I moved it just enough so the door could open. Around 2 a.m., I heard Diane downstairs. She was yelling. Then glass broke. Gerald shouted her name. Then there was a loud thud, followed by him groaning in pain. Footsteps started coming up the stairs, fast. I shut my door and pushed the dresser back as hard as I could. A few seconds later, Diane hit the door from the other side. The doorknob rattled violently. She kept saying it. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." The door shook. Something metal struck the wood. A piece of the door splintered inward. I looked at the window, my only exit. I got it open, kicked out the screen, climbed onto the porch roof, and jumped into the bushes below. I ran down the gravel driveway without looking back. Behind me, the front door opened. Diane was on the porch, holding a fireplace poker, screaming into the night. I kept running until I reached the road and finally got signal. I called 911. Gerald had a cut on his head and a broken wrist. Diane was taken away by paramedics. Later, Gerald admitted to my mom that Diane had attacked 2 other caregivers before me. He didn't want to put her in a facility. He thought he could handle it himself. If he wasn't an old man, my mom probably would have hit him. I think about how many times I had the chance to leave. How many signs I ignored because I didn't want to seem dramatic. We hold on to hope that things are still normal for as long as we can. And sometimes that's exactly what keeps us in danger.